I remember the first time I saw her. She was sitting by the window, her head slightly bowed, strands of hair falling over her face like they were trying to shield her from the world. But nothing could hide those green eyes. They weren't just green, they were deep, alive, full of storms that she tried so hard to keep quiet. There was something about the way her gaze lingered on nothing, staring past everyone, like she was searching for a place that didn't exist here. And in that moment, I knew I was drawn to her in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't just attraction, it was recognition. Like my own loneliness had found its reflection in her. At first, it was small things. A glance across the hallway, a polite smile when we passed each other, the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. People around her laughed, joked, carried on like the world was bright, but she always seemed slightly apart, like she was present but not really there. I would watch her sometimes, not out of rudeness but because I couldn't stop myself. She had this aura of quiet sadness, and I wanted to know what had put it there. I wanted to know what could make someone look so young yet so tired. The first time we spoke was accidental. I had dropped a book, and she bent down to pick it up before I could. Her fingers brushed mine as she handed it back, and she murmured, "Here." Just one word, soft, like she was afraid of taking up too much space. I thanked her, but she didn't look at me for more than a second. Still, in that second, I caught the shimmer of something behind those eyes, pain, maybe, or something even heavier. It left me restless, like I needed to see more. Days passed, and I found myself noticing the patterns of her life. She sat alone often, tucked into corners where nobody could disturb her. When she laughed, it was gentle and quick, gone before you could hold on to it. And sometimes, late in the evenings, I would find her outside, her arms folded, her gaze tilted toward the sky as though the stars might answer the questions she couldn't ask anyone else. I never interrupted those moments, but I watched. Something about her silence spoke louder than any words. One evening, everything changed. I was heading down the quiet stairwell when I saw her sitting there, her face hidden in her hands. At first, I thought she hadn't noticed me, but then I heard it, the sound of her muffled sobs. My heart twisted. I hesitated, not wanting to intrude, but before I could turn away, she looked up. Her eyes were red, glistening with tears that clung to her lashes. The storm inside her had broken free, and for the first time, I saw her without her mask. For a moment, we just stared at each other, and she quickly wiped her face like nothing had happened. "I'm fine," she whispered, even though everything about her said otherwise. I wanted to say something, to comfort her, but words felt too fragile. Instead, I sat down a few steps away, close enough so she knew she wasn't alone but far enough so she didn't feel trapped. We stayed like that in silence, and strangely, it felt like more was said in that quiet than in 100 conversations. She didn't tell me why she was crying, and I didn't ask. Sometimes, being there is more powerful than any question. After that night, things were different. She started to acknowledge me more. Small nods, shy greetings, little moments of connection that grew slowly, like a flower blooming after too long in the dark. I noticed she would glance at me when she thought I wasn't looking, her eyes soft but guarded, like she was still deciding if I was safe. And every time our eyes met, something tugged at my chest. I didn't know what scared me more, that I was falling for her, or that she might never let anyone close enough to catch her if she fell. Yet I couldn't walk away. Her sadness didn't push me off, it pulled me closer. It wasn't pity, it was recognition, because I had known what it was like to feel invisible too. And so, little by little, I started to find reasons to be around her. Not to force her walls down, but to let her see she didn't have to stand behind them forever. The night I caught her tears had planted something between us. A fragile thread. I could feel it every time her green eyes met mine, the thread pulling us closer, weaving something neither of us had the courage to name yet. And though nothing had been said, I knew one thing with certainty: this was only the beginning. She began to let me in slowly, like a door creaking open after years of being locked. At first, it was simple things, asking if I wanted to join her for coffee after class, walking beside me when the halls felt crowded, staying close without saying why. I noticed how she always carried herself with quiet caution, as though she was afraid of taking up too much space in the world. But when she was with me, that tension eased just a little. She didn't always speak much, but her silence around me felt different, comfortable, not heavy. It was in that silence that I learned to listen with more than my ears. There were evenings when we'd wander outside, her jacket pulled tight around her shoulders as the wind brushed past us. She liked to walk without destination, just moving through the night as though it could carry her worries away. I stayed by her side, letting her set the pace, not rushing her thoughts. Sometimes she would point out small things, the way the streetlight flickered, how the leaves looked golden under the glow, the shape of clouds covering the moon. It was subtle, but I realized those details mattered to her. She was looking for beauty in places where most people never stopped to look. And I understood that, because I had been searching for the same things all my life. One night, she stopped suddenly on the path and said quietly, "Do you ever feel like you don't belong anywhere?" Her voice trembled, not from the cold but from something deeper. I turned to her, and in her green eyes I saw the same storm I had noticed the first time we met. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let her continue. She told me how her family didn't really see her, how they smiled at the version of her they wanted but never accepted the truth of who she was. She admitted that she often felt like an intruder in her own life, pretending to be someone else just so others could be comfortable. I listened, my heart aching at every word, because I knew how much courage it must have taken for her to say it out loud. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she belonged here with me, but I could see she wasn't ready to hear it yet. So instead, I said softly, "I feel that way too sometimes." And it was true. We stood there, side by side under the dim light of the street lamp, two people who had spent too long trying to make ourselves smaller for a world that didn't want our fullness. She looked at me then, and for the first time, there was no guard in her eyes. Just honesty. From that night on, our conversations grew deeper. She began to share pieces of herself she had kept hidden. She told me about the ex who had broken her heart, how trust had turned into betrayal, how love had once left her feeling more empty than whole. She laughed bitterly when she said it, but her voice cracked in a way that revealed the pain still lived inside her. I wanted to reach out, to hold her hand, but I stayed still, knowing she had to release her pain at her own pace. I told her I understood, that I too had been hurt, and though our scars were different, the ache was familiar. She looked at me like she was surprised to be understood, like maybe the world hadn't completely abandoned her after all. The more time we spent together, the more I felt myself falling. It wasn't sudden, it was gradual, like waves lapping quietly at the shore until one day you realize the tide has pulled you in completely. I would catch myself watching her when she wasn't looking, memorizing the curve of her smile, the way her hair brushed against her cheek, the way her laughter, though rare, seemed to light up everything around her. And every time she turned and caught me staring, she would blush slightly and look away, pretending not to notice, though I knew she did. There was one evening, in the quiet of her room, when the walls between us thinned even more. We were sitting close, the glow of a small lamp casting a soft warmth over her face. She traced circles absent-mindedly on the edge of her notebook as she spoke about dreams she used to have, how she once wanted to travel, to see the world, to paint the colors of cities she had never been to. Her voice broke when she said she didn't think she was brave enough anymore. My chest tightened. I reached for her hand, gently this time, and when she didn't pull away, I held it. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly, but they curled into mine as though they had been waiting for it all along. She looked at me, and in her green eyes, I saw both fear and hope, fighting each other. It was the kind of look that made you want to promise the whole world. But I didn't rush, I didn't confess, I just let the moment breathe. Because sometimes, the strongest thing you can say is nothing at all. I could feel her pulse racing through her fingertips, and mine beat in rhythm with hers. For the first time, she didn't hide. She let me see her. And that was enough. The night everything shifted between us began with rain. It had been falling all evening, steady and heavy, the kind that seemed to soak into your bones and make the world feel smaller, quieter. I was sitting in my room, listening to the drops tapping against the window, when I heard a soft knock on the door. When I opened it, she was standing there, her hair damp, her jacket clinging to her shoulders, her green eyes shimmering not just from the rain but from something much heavier. She didn't say anything at first, she just stood there, trembling, her breath shaky. Without thinking, I stepped aside and let her in. The moment the door closed behind her, she broke. Her composure, the fragile walls she always tried to keep in place, shattered. Her lips parted like she wanted to explain, but no words came, only tears. They streamed down her face as she pressed her hands against her eyes, as though she could stop the flood if she just tried hard enough. My chest ached seeing her like that. I didn't ask what had happened. I didn't need to. I simply wrapped my arms around her, pulling her against me, and she collapsed into the embrace like she had been waiting for it all along. Her sobs were muffled against my shoulder, but every sound cut through me. She shook in my arms, whispering broken fragments, about her family, about harsh words that told her she wasn't enough, about the suffocating feeling of being unwanted. She whispered how tired she was of pretending, of fighting, of always being too much or not enough for the people she loved. Each word was soaked in despair, and I held her tighter, wishing I could take all that pain and bury it somewhere it could never touch her again. I whispered back softly, not promises I couldn't keep, but truths I believed, that she mattered, that her existence was not a mistake, that she was worthy of love exactly as she was. My voice trembled with the weight of it, because I wasn't just saying those words for her, I was saying them for me too, for the parts of myself that had once believed the same lies. Her breathing slowed gradually, her sobs softening into hiccups, and she lifted her head just enough to look at me. Her green eyes, still wet with tears, caught the faint light of the room. They were vulnerable, raw, and for a moment, I felt like I was staring directly into her soul. She whispered, "Why do you care so much?" The question pierced me, because it revealed how deeply she had convinced herself she wasn't worth caring about. I brushed a strand of hair from her face, my thumb gently wiping away the dampness on her cheek. "Because you're worth it," I said softly. "Even if you don't see it yet, I do." For a long moment, we just stayed like that, her in my arms, me holding her as if I could shield her from everything outside. The silence wasn't empty, it was full, charged with something I couldn't name. I felt her hand clutch the fabric of my shirt, desperate, almost afraid that if she let go, she would fall apart again. And I wanted her to know she didn't have to hold herself together alone anymore. Eventually, exhaustion settled into her body. She leaned her head against me, her breathing steady but uneven, her eyes still glossy. I guided her gently to the bed, not to cross any lines, but to give her a place to rest. She sat on the edge, her shoulders slumped, her gaze lowered to the floor as though she was ashamed of having broken down. I knelt in front of her, lifting her chin carefully so she would look at me. "You don't have to hide from me," I whispered. "Not ever." Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but instead, she just nodded, her eyes filling again though no tears fell this time. She slid down beside me on the bed, curling up with her knees tucked close, and I lay next to her, not touching at first, just letting her know I was there. After a moment, her hand reached for mine in the dimness, hesitant but sure. Her fingers intertwined with mine, and I squeezed gently, letting her know I wasn't going anywhere. We stayed that way for hours, the storm outside echoing the storm she carried inside. Yet in that space, the weight seemed lighter, not gone but shared. I could feel the warmth of her body so close to mine, the rhythm of her breathing slowing as she finally allowed herself to rest. She didn't speak again that night, and neither did I. There were no confessions, no declarations, just the quiet truth of two souls finding safety in each other's presence. When her breathing evened out and I realized she had fallen asleep, I turned my head slightly to look at her. Her face, softened in sleep, still carried traces of sadness, but there was also a kind of peace there I hadn't seen before. I lay awake long after, listening to the rain, holding her hand, and knowing that something had shifted forever. She had let me see the part of her she hid from everyone else, and I had promised silently, with every beat of my heart, that I would never let her face that darkness alone again. The days after that night carried a quiet change, something unspoken yet undeniably present between us. She no longer avoided my gaze when our eyes met, and there was a softness in her smiles that hadn't been there before. Still, I could sense the fragility of it all, like a glass bridge we were both learning to walk across carefully, afraid one wrong step might shatter everything. One evening, when the sun had already sunk and the sky outside was painted with a deep blue haze, she invited me to her room. There was a hesitation in her voice when she asked, like she wasn't sure if she was doing the right thing, but there was also a kind of need, a vulnerability that tugged at my heart. Her room was dim, lit only by a small lamp in the corner, casting warm golden shadows on the walls. Soft music hummed in the background, barely audible, like it was there just to fill the silence we couldn't yet find the words to break. She sat on the edge of her bed, her hands tangled together nervously, and for the first time, she looked almost fragile, as though letting me in was taking all the strength she had left. When I closed the door and stepped closer, she lifted her eyes to mine, and they were glistening again, those deep green eyes that carried both storms and tenderness, the same eyes that had haunted me since the very beginning. She tried to smile, but it faltered, her lips trembling as though the weight of her emotions was too heavy to mask. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered, her voice soft, almost breaking. My heart clenched at her words because I understood. This wasn't just about being together, it was about trust, about daring to believe that love could exist without pain, without betrayal. I sat beside her, close enough to feel her warmth but not too close to overwhelm her. Slowly, I reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers trembled against mine, and I felt the hesitation, the fear, and beneath it all, the hope. She turned her head, staring at the shadows dancing across the wall, and then the words poured out. She spoke of how she had built walls around her heart, how every time she had let someone close before, it had ended in scars. She admitted she was terrified of being broken again, terrified of not being enough, terrified of wanting something she might lose. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "I don't know if I can trust us, but I want to." The rawness of her confession left me breathless. I squeezed her hand gently and said, "You don't have to know how. You just have to let yourself feel it. We'll figure the rest out together." She finally turned to look at me, and her tears spilled over. Her eyes searched mine desperately, as if she was looking for proof that I wouldn't hurt her, that I wouldn't leave. In that moment, I wanted to give her every piece of reassurance she needed, every promise she feared she would never hear. I lifted my other hand and brushed her cheek gently, my thumb catching a tear as it slid down. She leaned into my touch like it was the first time in years someone had touched her without wanting to take something away. The air between us grew heavier, charged, but it wasn't rushed or desperate. It was tender, slow, full of the weight of everything unspoken. She leaned closer, her breath mingling with mine, and for a moment, we just stayed there, foreheads almost touching, both of us trembling with the enormity of what was about to happen. Then, with tears still clinging to her lashes, she closed the space and pressed her lips to mine. The kiss was soft, hesitant at first, but it carried more than passion, it carried release, healing, the courage of a heart finally daring to be vulnerable again. When she pulled back, her eyes were shining with both fear and wonder. She whispered, "I need you," her voice breaking, and before I could respond, she tugged me closer, pulling me into her bed. It wasn't out of desire alone, it was out of longing for closeness, for comfort, for the safety she had been denied for so long. Wrapped in her arms, I could feel her heart racing against mine, and I knew mine was beating just as wildly. We lay there together, her tears dampening my skin as she whispered how afraid she was of losing this, of losing me. I held her tighter, burying my face against her hair, and whispered back, "You won't. Not as long as I can breathe, you won't." The night unfolded in tenderness, in quiet touches and soft confessions, in the breaking down of walls that had stood for too long. It wasn't about perfection, it was about honesty, about allowing ourselves to be seen fully without fear. Her green eyes met mine in the dim light, no longer hiding, no longer running, and for the first time I felt the depth of her love. It wasn't loud or certain, it was fragile, trembling, but real. And as we held each other, the storm inside her seemed to quiet, replaced with a fragile but undeniable hope. The morning after that night felt different, not because the world outside had changed but because something inside us had. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, soft and golden, falling across her face as she stirred beside me. For a moment, I just watched her, the way her lashes rested gently against her cheeks, the way her lips parted slightly with each breath. She looked so peaceful, so unlike the girl who had cried in my arms just days before. It felt fragile, like if I moved too quickly, I might shatter the calm she had finally found. When her eyes fluttered open and those deep green irises met mine, I felt something pull at me from the inside, something warm and terrifying all at once. She smiled faintly, but it was shy, uncertain, as if she wasn't sure if last night had been a dream or something real. I reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, whispering that she didn't need to be afraid. Her fingers found mine under the blanket, and for a while, we lay there, saying nothing, just holding on to the quiet we had created between us. And the days that followed, everything seemed to shift into a new rhythm. We started walking together more openly, our shoulders brushing in ways that felt deliberate rather than accidental. She reached for my hand once when we were walking down an empty street at dusk, her grip tentative at first, but when I didn't let go, her fingers tightened like she was clinging to something she had never allowed herself before. In those small gestures, she was telling me she was ready to try, even if her heart was still trembling with fear. I felt lighter around her, like the weight of loneliness that had always sat in my chest was lifting each time she chose me, each time her green eyes softened when they landed on mine. But the world wasn't as kind as the little bubble we built for ourselves. Rumors began to ripple quietly, whispers in corners where people thought we couldn't hear. I noticed the way some eyes lingered on us longer than they should have, the way voices lowered as we passed by. She noticed it too. At first, she pretended she didn't, forcing her laughter to sound brighter, her smile to look easier. But late at night, when we were alone, she would grow quiet, her gaze distant, her fingers restless in my hands. One evening, she finally broke the silence, her voice trembling as she said she was scared people would ruin us. I held her hand tighter and told her that what we had wasn't theirs to break. But I could see the fear in her eyes, the old wounds opening again, the voice in her head telling her she wasn't strong enough to fight against the world's cruelty. That night she cried again, not with the same storm of despair as before but with a softer ache, like a child who just wanted a safe place to rest. I gathered her into my arms, kissed the crown of her head, and whispered that love, our love, wasn't something shameful. That what we had was worth every whisper, every stare, every shadow. Her tears dampened my shirt as she whispered back, "But what if I'm not worth it?" And in that moment, I felt my heart ache so deeply I thought it might split open. I pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, my hands framing her face as I said with a steady voice, "You are worth everything. Every fight, every storm, every moment of doubt. You are worth it, and I will never let you forget that." The way she looked at me then, like she was seeing something she had long stopped believing in, made my chest tighten. She kissed me, not out of passion this time, but out of desperation, out of the need to believe that maybe she really could be loved without conditions. And I kissed her back with everything in me, letting her feel the truth I couldn't always put into words. After that, she began to take small steps toward believing. She started leaving me notes, tiny scraps of paper tucked into my books, slipped into my bag, left on my pillow. They weren't long, just fragments of her heart written in shaky handwriting. "Thank you for seeing me. I'm scared, but I'm glad it's you. You make me feel less broken." Each note felt like a gift, proof that she was allowing herself to trust, to let me in where she had once shut everyone out. And each time I found one, I held it like something sacred, because to me, it was still. The whispers outside didn't stop, and there were days when she grew quiet again, her eyes clouding with doubt. She asked me once if I regretted it, choosing her, choosing us, knowing how the world might look at us. I told her without hesitation that I had never been more certain of anything. That even if the world turned its back, I would still stand beside her. She didn't answer, but she leaned into me, her head resting against my chest, and in the rhythm of her breathing, I felt her silent gratitude. The love growing between us wasn't simple or easy, but it was real. It was in the way her hand searched for mine when the crowd grew too loud, in the way she smiled softer when it was just us, in the way her eyes finally began to shine with something more than sadness. It was fragile, yes, but it was alive. And I knew I would do everything I could to keep it alive, to protect it, to protect her. Because she wasn't just someone I cared for, she had become the piece of me I didn't know I was missing. There was something different about her after those days of struggle, a quiet shift that I could feel more than I could see. She began to find pieces of herself again, pieces she had buried so deeply under years of fear and rejection that she almost forgot they existed. One evening, she showed me a stack of old canvases she had kept hidden in her closet. They were dusty, edges worn, colors faded but still alive with passion. She told me she used to paint all the time, that it once felt like the only place she belonged, but somewhere along the way, she had stopped. She had convinced herself that her art didn't matter, that nothing she created could ever be enough. As she spoke, her voice shook with a mixture of shame and longing, like part of her still wanted to believe in it but didn't know how. I sat beside her on the floor as she pulled one canvas after another into the light. I saw sunsets bleeding into oceans, faces half hidden in shadows, wild strokes of color that screamed of emotions too heavy to speak. Each painting was a fragment of her soul, locked away in silence. I told her they were beautiful, not because I wanted to comfort her but because they truly were. She shook her head at first, brushing it off, saying I was only being kind. But when I took her hand and placed it gently against one of the canvases, I whispered, "This is you. This is your heart. And it's beautiful because it's real." For a long moment, she didn't speak, just stared at the painting, her green eyes flickering with something soft, something hopeful. That night she picked up a brush again for the first time in years. I watched quietly as she set up a blank canvas, her hands trembling as though she wasn't sure she had the right to begin again. But slowly, with careful strokes, color began to spread across the white. She painted in silence, her brow furrowed in concentration, but there was a peace in her expression I hadn't seen before. I didn't interrupt, didn't try to fill the quiet, because it felt sacred, like I was witnessing her rebirth. When she finally put the brush down hours later, she looked exhausted but lighter, as though something heavy had finally loosened its grip on her chest. She turned to me, eyes shimmering with unshed tears, and whispered, "I thought I lost this part of me forever." I pulled her into my arms and told her she never lost it, it had just been waiting for her to come back. In the weeks that followed, her art bloomed again. She would paint late into the night, sometimes pulling me in to watch, sometimes asking me to sit quietly beside her as she worked. And every time she stepped back from a finished piece, I saw more light in her eyes, more strength in the way she held herself. Her laughter became easier, her smiles less guarded, and there were nights when she would curl into me afterward, whispering that for the first time in years, she felt alive. I would stroke her hair and tell her that she had always been alive, always burning with something extraordinary, she just needed to see it again. But as much as she was healing, the world still had its shadows. Her family's disapproval hung over her like a storm cloud, always threatening to return. One evening, after another painful argument with them, she came to me shaken, her voice trembling as she told me they had said things she could never forget. Words that cut deeper than knives, words that told her she was a disappointment, a mistake, that she would never be enough. I felt anger rise in me, but I swallowed it down because what she needed wasn't my rage, it was my steadiness. I held her face in my hands and told her, with all the certainty I could gather, "They don't define you. You are not their words. You are more than their fear. You are more than their blindness." Her tears spilled as she pressed her forehead against mine, whispering that she didn't want to lose me, that she didn't think she could survive another abandonment. I kissed her softly, tenderly, and told her she didn't have to worry. That no matter how loud the world shouted, I wasn't going anywhere. I promised her that love wasn't supposed to hurt the way she had been taught it would. It was supposed to heal, to build, to make us stronger, and that's what I wanted to do with her. She clung to me then, her arms around me so tight I could feel her desperation, her need to believe that maybe love could stay this time. As the days went on, she began to believe in that promise a little more. It showed in the way she spoke about her future, timidly at first, then with growing courage. She told me she wanted to travel again one day, to see the world, to fill her canvases with the colors of places she had never been. She told me she wanted to stand in the sun without hiding, to love without shame. And as she said those things, I could see the fear in her still, but I could also see the hope fighting its way to the surface. It was fragile, but it was real, and every time I looked into her green eyes, I knew I would fight with her, for her, until that hope grew strong enough to drown out the shadows. Because she wasn't just healing for herself anymore, she was teaching me what it meant to truly love someone, to carry their scars as if they were my own, to believe in them until they could believe in themselves again. There came a time when everything we had built together was tested, when the fragile hope she was holding on to trembled under the weight of the world's harshness. It started with distance, not physical at first, but emotional. She began to pull away in small ways, her replies shorter, her laughter less certain, her eyes wandering somewhere far beyond me even when we were sitting right beside each other. At first, I thought it was just her mood, a passing shadow, but the shadows lingered. One night, as we sat in silence on her bed, she finally spoke, her voice soft and uneven. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, and the words felt like they cracked something open inside me. I turned to her, confused and aching, but before I could ask, she continued. She told me she was terrified of what it meant to love me so openly. That every whisper, every cruel look, every disapproving word from her family felt like another brick crushing her chest. She said she didn't want to hurt me, didn't want me to suffer because of her. Her hands trembled as she twisted them together, her green eyes shining with tears as she whispered that maybe it would be easier if she let me go before she ruined me too. Hearing her say those words felt like being cut from the inside, but I could also see the fear driving them, the deep scars of never believing she was enough. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plead. Instead, I reached for her hands, holding them tightly in mine even as she tried to pull away. I told her that love was never about ease, never about avoiding storms, but about choosing each other despite them. I told her that she wasn't ruining me, she was saving me in ways she didn't even realize. She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks, whispering that she didn't know how to believe me. And I whispered back that she didn't have to believe right away. She only had to stay, to give us the chance to prove that love could be stronger than fear. The days after were hard. She wavered between closeness and distance, sometimes clinging to me like she couldn't breathe without me, sometimes pushing me away as though loving me was too heavy a burden. It broke me in quiet ways, but I refused to give up. I stayed patient, steady, reminding her with every touch, every word, every glance that I wasn't going anywhere. When she avoided my eyes, I stayed close. When she cried in silence, I held her until her breathing slowed. When she whispered she didn't deserve me, I kissed her and told her she deserved the world. Slowly, painfully, something began to change. The more I refused to leave, the more she began to realize that maybe this time was different. One evening, as we walked together under the pale glow of streetlights, she suddenly slipped her hand into mine in full view of everyone. Her grip was firm, almost defiant, and when I looked at her, she was staring straight ahead, her chin lifted, her eyes steady. My heart swelled in my chest, because it wasn't just about holding my hand, it was about her choosing not to hide anymore. That choice carried into other moments too. She started speaking back when people whispered, not loudly but firmly. She stopped apologizing for existing, stopped shrinking herself to fit into the narrow boxes others tried to force her into. And in the quiet of our nights together, she let me see her more fully than ever before. She confessed her fears, yes, but she also confessed her dreams, her desires, the soft places in her heart she had always kept hidden. And every time she let me in, every time she allowed me to hold her without flinching, I knew we were stitching ourselves together more tightly, piece by piece. There were still nights when the doubts returned, when she would crumble into my arms and whisper that she was afraid of losing everything. But by then, we had learned how to fight through it together. I would hold her close, remind her of all the moments we had already survived, remind her of the strength she carried even when she couldn't see it. And when her green eyes finally lifted to meet mine again, I would see not just the storm but the light breaking through it. One night, as we lay together in the quiet, her head resting on my chest, she whispered something that stayed with me forever. "I think I'm starting to believe you," she said, her voice soft but steady. My arms tightened around her, my heart swelling with both relief and love, because I knew what it had taken for her to reach that place. She wasn't just believing in me, she was starting to believe in herself again, starting to believe that she was worthy of love, worthy of staying, worthy of happiness. That night we kissed with a new kind of intimacy, not desperate or fearful, but whole. It wasn't just lips meeting lips, it was hearts pressing together, souls promising to keep walking side by side no matter how heavy the path became. And as her green eyes looked into mine afterward, calm and certain, I realized that the girl who once thought she was too broken to love was now teaching me what love truly meant. Not perfection, not ease, but the quiet, unwavering choice to stay. The morning light fell through the window like it was blessing us, soft golden rays brushing against her face as she stirred beside me. There was no rush, no tension, no trace of the old fear that had haunted her for so long. For the first time, her breathing was calm, her shoulders free from that invisible weight she always carried. I lay there watching her, memorizing every detail, the curve of her lips, the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the way her messy hair spread across the pillow. And when her green eyes finally fluttered open and she caught me staring, she smiled in that shy, tender way that had once been rare but was now becoming her natural expression. She whispered, "What?" like she was embarrassed, and I shook my head, telling her, "Nothing, I just love seeing you like this." Her smile deepened, and she tucked herself closer against me, like she was finally allowing herself to be at peace. That day, we didn't plan anything. We moved slowly, deliberately, as if savoring the life we were building. She painted for hours while I sat nearby, sometimes reading, sometimes just watching her with quiet awe. Her brush moved with confidence now, each stroke vibrant, purposeful. She wasn't just painting for herself anymore, she was painting for the world, ready to let her voice spill onto the canvas without shame. At one point, she set the brush down, turned to me, and asked softly, "Do you think anyone will ever really understand me through these?" I walked over, stood behind her, and wrapped my arms around her waist, my chin resting on her shoulder. I whispered, "Even if no one else does, I do. And I always will." She leaned back against me, eyes closing for a moment, and whispered back, "That's enough." Evenings became our sanctuary. We would cook together, laughing at burned dishes or clumsy mistakes, turning even the smallest routines into moments of joy. And when night fell, we would lie in bed, tangled in each other, talking about dreams we once thought were too fragile to say aloud. She spoke of traveling to places where no one knew her name, of standing in front of strangers at an art gallery and showing them the parts of herself she had hidden for too long. I told her about my hopes too, about building a life where love wasn't a secret but a truth we carried openly. And in those talks, I realized something powerful. We weren't just surviving anymore, we were building. There were still moments when fear tried to creep back in, when she would pause mid-laughter and I could see the shadow flicker in her eyes, that old worry of losing it all. But now, instead of retreating, she would reach for me. She would hold my hand, grounding herself, and remind herself out loud that she wasn't alone anymore. That simple act made me realize just how far she had come. She wasn't running from her pain anymore. She was learning to face it, to fight it, to rise above it with me beside her. One night, under the blanket of stars, we walked to a quiet hill outside the city. She carried a small canvas with her, one she had been working on for weeks but hadn't shown me yet. When we reached the top, she handed it to me with trembling hands. The painting was of us, two figures sitting together, surrounded by light, their faces turned toward each other, unafraid. My throat tightened, and tears stung my eyes as I looked at it. She whispered, almost too softly to hear, "This is what you gave me. You gave me back the parts of me I thought I lost." I turned to her, cupped her face in my hands, and kissed her like my entire soul was spilling into hers. When I pulled back, I told her, "You were never lost. You were always here. I just reminded you how to see yourself." In that moment, I knew we had reached a place beyond fear, beyond doubt. We had fought for each other, through storms of pain and walls of silence, and somehow, love had not only survived but grown stronger. Her green eyes no longer carried just tears and shadows, they carried light, resilience, and a love that felt unbreakable. As we lay back on the grass, staring up at the stars, she whispered, "Do you think we'll make it? Do you think this love will last?" I turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and smiled. "It already has," I said. "It lasted through every fear, every doubt, every storm. And it will keep lasting, because we'll keep choosing it, every single day." She smiled then, a real, unguarded smile that reached her eyes, and I knew there was no turning back. The world might still throw challenges at us, but we were no longer fragile, no longer hiding. We were two souls stitched together by something deeper than fear, something that no disapproving voice, no cruel word, no shadow could ever undo. And as she curled into me that night, her breath warm against my skin, I realized this wasn't just the end of her pain or my waiting. This was the beginning of everything we had always deserved but never thought we could have. Love, whole and unbroken. Love that stayed. Love that healed.